So with today's modern equipment, the release has changed dramatically from the old days of urethane and plastic bowling balls.
Right. I don't know if it's even happened intentionally. I think it's just guys have figured out that, wow, if I do it like this, my ball doesn't roll very good. So they've, I think it's just sort of evolution has come to just their hands being in a different spot.
Gone are the days when people flock to the pro shop to get a big, strong wrist device to help them with rotation and revs. In fact, the modern release is exactly opposite of the cupped and finger hit the ball that we used to see back in the old days. The modern release is a whipping action. We actually need the release, the wrist, to uncoil to create the motion that we're looking for. In fact, we have video of some of the Team USA players at release point, and when their thumb is out of the ball, their wrist is actually in a broken position.
Right. I think their grip pressure is so much looser than it ever has been, and you can see that everything is just effortless. Their wrist is relaxed, and versus what we used to do where we had this, almost this death grip on it to make sure your hand did this certain thing and we're hitting up on it. We were doing so much to try and make the ball hook, and nowadays they just roll their hand after it. It's much, much looser and softer motion.
Everyone wanting to get more revs, the way to do that is getting a Gumby wrist release. We want to let the wrist relax at release point. We want to let the ball fall off of the thumb and onto the fingers to create the revs that we're talking about. Chris Barnes is one of the best at this. Think about trying to crack a whip or snap a towel. You can't do that with a rigid wrist. It has to be a flexible wrist. And when we do that with the bowling hand, we allow the wrist to relax and create a whipping motion, and that's where all of the revs and everything come from.
Right, the more revs happen simply from that time frame from your thumb exiting and your fingers releasing and exiting off of the ball. So the longer that time frame, the higher your rev rate's going to be. That's why the two-handers, they get their hands so far underneath the ball that their fingers come out so much later than their thumb, and that's how they're able to get all of that energy.
So we have some great video of David and Jonathan throwing the ball both with a firm wrist in an old-fashioned type release and the modern release with the relaxed wrist at release point. Let's take a look at it.
So here we have David, and he's displaying what your hand would look like with the static release. It's a lot of grip pressure, wrist is very cupped, and it stays in that stationary position throughout the release, and we can tell that it's almost like the ball comes off his hand all at the same time. There's not really a very long time frame between his thumb exiting and his fingers, so his rev rate starts to suffer. I think when we do it this way, we just don't get as much of a good ball roll with this.
That's why in the old days, people would try to finger lift the ball to compensate for that rigid wrist. And as you can see, it's actually a little bit difficult for David to throw it with this rigid wrist. The modern players have become so good at allowing that wrist to relax and the heel of the palm to come forward as you watch his release here as we move towards his modern release. As we look at it, you can see his hand in a very strong position. As he comes through the release zone again, you see that wrist start to relax and the heel of the palm starting to come forward. And if we can freeze it here and take a look at it at release point, you'll see what we would actually call back then a broken wristed position. And we thought this was weak. But in the modern player's game, he's able to turn this into revolutions and rotation. And now we can take a look at Jonathan here with his version of the rigid release. And this is very difficult for these guys to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to kind of, when I was playing pretty regularly, and we had a lot of wrist injuries, and, just people had trouble with tendons, and I think it has a lot to do with just the amount of grip pressure that was necessary to release the ball in this fashion. So, I'd be surprised if we were to look at it, that we're probably seeing less of that going on today, because again, they are just as relaxed and loose with their hand to get the ball to do much more than we ever could before.
And let's take a look at Jonathan's good modern release shot here, and we'll see the same thing with the hand coming from a very strong position, and you can see a whipping action as he comes through the release window. It's a very quick motion, and when it happens quickly enough, that whipping action actually causes the fingers to impart some more revolutions onto the ball without finger hitting it upward. So you get the benefit of the revolutions without the over and under reaction if you were to finger hit it.
So what do we want to take from all this?
Well, we want to bring the release into the modern era to match the modern bowling ball. And what we see is we've gone from the rigid wrist to the elastic wrist. And the elastic wrist is a far better match to the modern day bowling ball, which has skid and snap built into it. So we can create this soft-handed, soft-wristed release to create the better ball motion that we're looking for down on the lanes.
Right, so we're letting the ball in the lane do the work, and the players are doing much less than they used to.